And then and by the way, they went on and said, there are plenty of good examples of environmental deterioration that we could use, but they said the main thing is we could create them and make them even worse than they are if we wanted to, and really scare the wits out of people, so they would have to be united in a global movement to give up their liberties to save the planet. So all of these things, were discussed, and you and I, if we thought about it and we wanted to play that game, we could sit down and say, okay, we're the bad guys. We want to figure out how to convince people to surrender themselves passively to our control. How can we do it? And we would come up with things pretty much like this. And it's not that they're so smart. It's just that I'm going to use the word, they're evil, because they really are doing these things. It's not just a game. It's not a parlor game. This is the real thing. And the people that they're planning to enslave are us. This is not just something to talk about and think about. We have skin in the game. We are the slaves that they want. So it's something we have to take very seriously.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. Absolutely.
I'd like to add something you mentioned on this individualism and the greater good of the greater number. That really is a fundamental issue, and I'm surprised I didn't even mention it before now. But let me go through that.
Sure.
Because one of the most distinctive features of the difference between individualism and collectivism is this question of the group versus the individual. And that's, of course, where the word comes from, individualism versus collectivism. Now, the collectivists believe deeply that the group is more important than the individual, that the individual must be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. I was taught that in school at the university, and it made sense to me. After all, the greater good, isn't that what democracy is all about? And you can't have one person or two people stand in the way of the greater good of all the rest of it. It just didn't make sense. And so I didn't question it. It's become the mantra of most people in the world today, the greater good for the greater number. But when you think about it, there's some real serious problems with it. Take, for example, a lynch mob. Now, in that situation, there's only one dissenting vote, and he's at the end of the rope. So if you really think that the greater good of the greater number is a good philosophy, well then, what's wrong with the lynch mob? That's sort of an implementation of exactly what you're talking about. And we've got to say, well, wait a minute, let's back up. Well, maybe under some circumstances, it's got to be limited. And now you're starting to think, and they don't want you to think about that. They just want you to go for the slogan. And when you start thinking, you realize that, well, we were talking about where does the right come from to injure or even kill another person? It comes from an individual's right to protect their lives, their liberty, and property. But beyond that, this thing called group is a tricky word. In fact, it's a deceitful word, because the group doesn't even exist.
Right.
There is no such thing as a group. You cannot touch a group. You cannot see a group. You can touch individuals. You can see a bunch of individuals. But the concept of many individuals is an abstraction in the mind. It's not a physical reality. It does not exist except as some kind of electron movement in the neurons of the brain. It's a mathematical concept like the number 3. 3 does not exist except as a concept. It's not a thing. And so this thing that we call group is not a thing. It's an abstraction. It doesn't exist in any philosophy, any ideology that says that something that does not exist has rights, human rights that are superior to the rights of something that does exist, like a human being. You've made a tremendous mistake, because you've set in motion the possibility, no, not the possibility, the inevitability that someone was going to come along, some some demagogue is going to come along and say, vote for me and I will represent you. I will be the leader of the group. We will speak for the people. And they will start using all those phrases about, democracy, the people, the group, the greater good of the greater number. But it all boils down, you need a leader. You need a spokesman, and I will be it. I will speak for the group. I will defend the group. And everybody says, yay, we found ourselves a leader. And so what happens is that this demagogue comes along and using vocabulary like that becomes the absolute dictator, an absolute dictator in the name of the group, which doesn't exist. And it's a fantastic political trick that works almost every time because people don't stop and think it through, and they certainly are not asked to think it through in the universities or the grade schools, which are all funded by governments, which benefit from this philosophy a lot. So this idea of the group being a higher ideal than the individual is fictitious, it's dangerous, it always leads to destruction of individual liberties. The fact is, David, after I've spent so much time thinking about it and reading about it, I came to the conclusion that a system of law that protects the rights of the individual above all else is the greatest good for the greatest number.
Right.
That is the only way the greatest number of people can have the highest level of freedom and whatever they want to achieve, is if their individuality is recognized and not overpowered by this mythological abstraction called the group. So it's a profound exercise in thinking. When you go follow this all the way through, you come out the other side and you think, my gosh, I've been advocating the wrong things for most of my life. I never realized that I was advocating the very things that are going to be destructive of those objectives which I most want to achieve.